Hey everybody, welcome to Piecewise Functions video number 3 on absolute value, which the absolute value function is kind of like the parent of all these piecewise functions, probably the most common piecewise function. So if you look at the equation, they want us to graph it. And we're used to seeing just, oh, graph y equals this, and you plug in some numbers, and you get this nice V-shaped graph. Okay, and as we're getting set up, Mr. Bennett's going to plug in his computer before it dies on us. Pause now. Okay, we're back after a brief pause. You can see our absolute value. It's broken into two different pieces because when you're greater than or equal to 0, your number, we're talking about the distance. We're always talking about the distance we are from 0. But when you have a positive number, whatever that number is, that's its absolute value. Because if you take that number minus 0, you get it. So like 10, the absolute value of 10 is 10, right? Because 10 minus 0 is 0. Remember, absolute value is the distance you are from 0. That doesn't work for negatives. The negatives, you've got to take the opposite of that. So when x is less than 0, so if I say negative 5, the absolute value needs to be the opposite of that. And that's what the negative x is saying here. The opposite of x. The opposite of negative 5 is 5. That's the absolute value. So when we graph this, we can pick, just a few numbers, 1 to 3 and negative 1 to 3, or negative 1 to negative 3, excuse me. The absolute value of 0 is 0, the absolute value of 1 is 1, the absolute value of 2 is 2, the absolute value of 3 is 3. And then it's mirrored over on the other side. The absolute value of negative 1 is 1, the absolute value of negative 2 is 2, the absolute value of negative 3 is 3. Okay, and I want to be very specific about this domain and range. The domain of this function, the domain of f of x, is going to be all real numbers. Every value works. Every real number works. The range of our function, you can tell it does not go below the x-axis. So the range of the function is from 0 to infinity. And that's going to help us in the next problem down. So in examples 6 and 7, it's not asking us to graph this. It's asking, number 1, for the domain and range, and then find where all the outputs are going to be 3. So when you talk about the domain, it's an absolute value function. The domain of this function is all real numbers, right? If it's an absolute value function, the domain is always going to be all real numbers. Okay, I just showed you the parent function up there. The range, again in this case, there's no shifting down. We have this general formula, right, for absolute value, x minus h, and h and k is our vertex. There is no number on the outside shifting our graph up and down, so our range is also not going to change from above. It's going to just remain from 0 to infinity. So that is your domain and range of your piecewise function, your absolute value function there. Now in the next one, it's saying what are the x values? So solve this equation when f of x equals 3. If you're looking at this v, it doesn't matter what shape it is. Okay, we're going to hit 3 twice. If you think of a horizontal line and then your graph that's a v, it's going to hit twice. So how do you do that? Well, number 1, if we think about the absolute value, you're going to have, remember, our function, if we rewrote this, we would have 2x minus 7 for x is greater than or equal to 0. But then in the bottom one would be the opposite of that. You would think of negative 2x plus 7, the opposite of our entire function for x is less than 0. So those are the two equations we're going to solve. We're going to solve, hey, when does 2x minus 7 equal 3? Then you're also going to solve, hey, when does negative 2x plus 7 equal 3? And we're going to solve those two linear equations. So you're going to add 7 here, add 7, and you get 2x equals 10. So x equals 5 is one solution. And if you solve that other linear equation, you have minus 7, so you get negative 2x equals negative 4. So x equals 2. So your two solutions are x equals 5 and x equals 2. So that's the last video we have on piecewise functions and dealing with this absolute value function. So if you have any questions or comments, please type them below, and we'll see you next time.